Biden could have stopped it, and Zelensky could have stopped it, and Putin should have never started it. Everybody's to blame.
Have you spoken to President Zelensky, sir, about his offer to purchase more Patriot missile batteries?
Oh, I don't know. He's always looking to purchase missiles, you know. He's against, listen, when you start a war, you got to know that you can win the war, right? You don't start a war against somebody that's 20 times your size and then hope that people give you some missiles.
That was President Trump just a few hours ago. Actually, that was made while we were on the air last when we were talking about the Russia-Ukraine war with Colonel Jacques Beau. I recommend you go and watch that video. It's got some great stuff in there. He had some tremendous insights that really show a lot about what's going on. But what President Trump said there basically reinforced a lot of the fundamentals that we discussed there. And it sounds like that we're on the same page and the same sheet of music as the president is on this. And that is, listen, this war it's done. It's off. The decision is already made. The decision is already reached. The Ukraine side lost. The Russian side won. The only question outstanding now, how much worse will the end be? And as we talked about several times, there's a deal to be had on the table right now that the Zelensky can agree to, that presumably, from what's being reported publicly anyway, that Trump has said, I'm going to offer a detailed settlement that we can get the war over with. They haven't released any of the terms of it yet, even what they're trying to negotiate with Russia, only that they're talking. But whatever they are, I can just tell you that they will be ugly for the Ukraine side. They will be probably very ugly for the Ukraine side. And it's going to be something that's almost nobody in Ukraine and even fewer in Europe are going to want to stomach. But the alternative is that Trump's patience runs out and that he ends up just saying, you know what? I gave it my best chance. This was Biden's war. He's the one that started this. He spent 3 years bypassing every opportunity to have peace that there was. And I'm not going to do the same. I'm not going to continue to function and to facilitate and to support a war that can't win when all it'll do is just keep it going longer and make sure more Ukrainian men die. I think that he's getting close to the point to where he's going to say, that's just it. You guys are on your own, or you take the ugly deal, because you either get the ugly negotiated deal or you get a horrific, flat out military defeat the other way. Don't know how much longer that would take, but just looking at reality on the ground and the military fundamentals, it's virtually as certain that Ukraine will get ground to nothing and end up dying. Also thought it was really interesting there at the end of that comment that Trump said, listen, you don't go against somebody who's 20 times higher than you and then wonder if you're going to get some missiles later. I can't help but remember this passage from the Bible in Luke 14:31-32, where Jesus himself says, or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he is not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and ask for terms of peace. That, and you know, Jesus said that because it was so self-evident. He was using that as a vehicle to make a bigger spiritual truth, but he used that vehicle because it's so obvious that that's what any rational person would do. And yet, as President Trump just pointed out there, and we've actually said a number of times, that is not what the Ukraine side did. And even now, all this time later, he still won't deal with reality and continues to go down a path of, now probably it's, instead of the example from Jesus there of 10,000 and 20,000, it's probably 1 to 20, like the President Trump said there a second ago. That's probably more accurate to the actual disparity between the two. And instead, he just won't make the obvious, logical, rational decision. And his countrymen continue to pay the price for it every day. And that is egregious. It hurts my soul. I try to put on a good face on it here. I try to keep it professional, but I promise you that it is a constant albatross around my neck and just sore anxiety that it causes me, just because I care about people. I care more about the Ukrainian people, I think, than most of these alleged supporters throughout the West and the others in the previous administration claim to care about them. And yet everything they did made sure more Ukrainians got killed without the possibility of having a victory and a success. But that's kind of where we are, whether I like it or not. That's just the reality of it. It's just hard to imagine there could be this much disconnection from reality throughout the entire Western world. But we'll see if that ends up changing. One of the reasons why You get people saying those kinds of things. Why you have all of these leaders keep on going down this path is because there has been, whether it's an intentional or just the way it worked out process, you have a lot in the major media. You've heard Ian Puddock, the smartest man in London, talks about this a lot from the UK side, where he said all the major media are kind of lockstep behind what the British government wants, and they only tell one version of a story. No matter how disconnected from reality it is, they just keep on giving it. So it's the only narrative that the British people hear. Well, it's not quite that bad in the United States, but man, sometimes it is. And there was last night an interview by CBS News, 60 Minutes, the flagship of their news shows, that had, with Scott Pelley was talking to Volodymyr Zelensky. And in this conversation, it is as close to just outright propaganda as I may have seen in any one show. I mean, there's been a lot over the 3+ years of this war, but this is one of the worst, and especially coming this late in the war, I think it has to be the worst. Whether it's an intentional propaganda, whether it's just bad misinformation, bad journalism, I can't say, because I don't have enough information. I don't know what led them to say the things that they do. I can only speculate from outside. But what I can tell you with absolute certainty is that the stuff they say and the stuff they don't say leads to outright misinformation. So everybody who was watching that was either intentionally or whatever led to believe a certain truth, a certain state of facts, a certain state of the war. And if that's all they had, they are misinformed. And they may then be subject to wanting to support policies that will only harm more Ukrainians. That's the truth of it. I'm going to show you several. We took several bites of this. I recommend you go watch the whole thing, so you see the whole thing in context. It's on CBS News. You can just Google that and find it with great ease. Number one, he repeated the same thing that Biden said probably 5,000 times during his time in office: the unprovoked war against Ukraine. That's the common thing that he said there. No room for equivocation. No consideration that there may be other factors. Not even as like, well, it's a little complicated, but I think this is the right one. Nothing. Just a flat statement. It was unprovoked. And I'm saying, really, you call that unprovoked? What do you suggest that from the year 2007, when Vladimir Putin went to the Munich Security Conference and addressed the Western world and said, by the way, this whole thing about you wanting to go into Ukraine and NATO and give membership to those states, that's not going to fly. We consider that a grave threat. That's what he told them there. You go down that path, it's a grave threat. The next year, 2008, at the Bucharest summit, the NATO summit, NATO members by name specified Georgia and Ukraine will become a member of NATO. So they took whatever Putin said and said, yeah, I don't care that you consider that a grave threat. Not interested in your opinion. We're going to go do this because nobody tells us what to do. So that was the very first of the provocations. And then we had the events of 2013, 2014, where the legally elected government in Ukraine, which was leaning toward the Russian side in terms of its policies and security, et cetera, was overthrown with the support of the United States and others in Western Europe. And when there was a chance to have a negotiated settlement to end that violent situation that happened in the Maidan Square, you've probably heard some of that in the early part of 2014, the Russians, the Europeans, and the Ukrainians all came together and they said, all right, we're going to work out a deal where there's going to be new elections starting in May of that year. This is in February. In May of that year, we're going to have it. So we'll have early elections and you'll get a chance. So if you think your side was on the upside, if you think that the president who was elected at that time, who wanted to have more economic integration with Russia instead of the European Union, if you don't like that path, then you can go back to the ballot box then, and you can elect a new leader who will go down that path. Instead, our side, because we have intercepted telephone calls between Victoria Nuland and some of the ambassador, the U.S. ambassador at the time, we're actively working on already selecting who's going to be in charge of what. And of course, then Russia calls them coup plotters, the people who were rising up against the legally elected government, then seized power. And then the elected president had to leave. So instead of going to the ballot box, they just took it, even though they would have certainly won. The Russians knew that they were going to lose the election and still were willing to go and say, we'll have the elections anyway, because then it's legal. So the Russia we always accuse of being not democratic and being authoritarian and stuff was willing to have an election that they supported that they knew almost certainly they would lose. But instead of doing that, we said, nope, we're going to go this way. We're going to take it. And it was after that Russia said, okay, I see that we can't trust you. I'm not going to trust the security of the Russian-speaking people in the Ukraine to that, especially in Crimea, where our naval base is, in Sevastopol, so that we're going to annex that. And they had this election. Some say it was a sham. Some say it was legitimate. Don't know. I don't have the personal knowledge to be able to say one way or the other. All I can say is that's exactly what did happen, and that's the reason why. So that was provoked as well. And then, of course, we had the Minsk agreements in 2015. And Russia forever just said, follow that Minsk agreement. The absolute heart of that agreement was that the Ukraine government would change its constitution so that it gave limited autonomy to the Luhansk and Donetsk republics and to the Russian speakers in the country. That was a non-negotiable from the Russian side. Everything else pinned it off of that. The Ukraine side never did it. We, of course, know subsequently that France and Germany, who were signatories to that, both said they never intended for Ukraine to actually abide by it. That's why they never put any pressure onto them. And then that led to the events heading into this war here. And this war even started because in little known in the West, you'll know if you've watched our show, you'll know if you've seen Colonel Jacques Beau in previous episodes that we've had, chronicled how Ukraine, Zelensky himself, after he was elected in 2019, put in a law that said they're going to retake the areas that the Russians had annexed by force if necessary. That was a problem. Russia showed that that's not going to happen. And so they had this military buildup, which started in, I think, the very next month in April of 2021. And then it reached a peak in December 2021 when Putin came up with a new opportunity and said, all right, here's a new plan that we have, a new negotiated settlement, which is worse than the Minsk agreements, but still way better than anything else because it would have resulted in Russian troops withdrawing from the country. There wouldn't have ever been a war. We rejected every one of those. And then, of course, right before the war started, the Ukrainian military started shelling the areas in Ukraine, by the way. Remember, this was a civil war, and they started shelling with a much higher frequency the Russian-speaking population in the eastern part of Ukraine, and that was the trigger that Russia finally said, all right, that's it. There's no more talking. We're going into war. So you can say that Russia shouldn't have done that. You can say there was other alternatives, but what you cannot say is that it was unprovoked. Cannot say that if you're being honest at all. Pele said none of that. So you want a just and lasting peace? That was the question it was asked. What does a just peace look like? It's one of the questions I ask a lot. Recently, we've gotten some answers here, which we put on the channel. But now here's Scott Pelley getting it from the man himself. What does Zelensky think is a just and lasting peace? And he said it's one where we maintain our sovereignty, where we maintain our military, where we maintain our territory. And I'm not going to agree to anything we're not going to acknowledge that we lost any of the territory to Russia, and that in any case, and eventually we'll get it back to our in the future. Don't know how, but we'll get it back somewhere. So what you were telling Russia unequivocally is there is no negotiating with this man. There is no deal that he can make. There is no concessions that they can give, because what Zelensky is asking President Putin to do is surrender. He's asking him to say, I will set the terms for a negotiated settlement. It will be what I decide and only what I decide. And I'm going to have this big reassurance force that's going to be part of that. I'm going to bring a bunch of people in from the West. We're going to continue to build. As soon as we get the fighting stopped, we're going to build our forces back up. We're going to keep getting support from Europe well into the future. They promised stuff up through 2030. And then later on, when I'm capable, or when the future president is capable, then we'll take them back. Don't know how, but we're going to do that. That's what you have just told Russia. Now, it doesn't even matter at this point what Steve Witkoff can say, what the Secretary of State Rubio can say, anybody, President Trump himself. If Putin says, you got to get this guy under control, because who am I going to sign a deal with? Am I going to sign a deal with that guy on his terms when I have the military advantage? He's not going to have it. You have just told the Russians, forget about what Trump is saying and just fight until you take what you want. So that there's no demilitarization, denazification. Nobody has to willingly withdraw from any areas, as there was some concern just the last week or so from the Ukraine side. You don't have to worry about that. Russia will simply seize it by force, even if it takes them another year of fighting. You had Colonel Mark Reisner of the Austrian forces in an interview with the new Zurich Zeitung, the newspaper, this morning, I believe it was. He said, listen, you just got to look. Russia thinks that this is like April 1945 and they're about to win the war. They have the military power to do it. And by the way, all evidence shows that they can continue at the current rate of expenditure, both of manpower and equipment, ammunition, et cetera, for 2 more years. Easy. 2 more years. Ukraine will be lucky if it makes it through another couple of, if it makes it to the middle of the summer, I will be shocked. But in any case, there is a finite number of Ukrainian men, and that number dwindles by the day. And with the United States not even offering to have any other additional support, and with the European Union saying, here's 1/3 of what the U.S. alone gave last year, and that'll be spread out between now and 2030, means it's going to be minuscule. You won't have a fraction of enough ammunition, weapons, anything else, or manpower. It is inevitable that at some point the Ukraine military just collapse, and it loses the ability to have a coherent defense. And at some point, the Russians will be able to drive into the country. That's what you're setting the stage for. You're telling Russia that's your only play here. So congratulations, Scott Pelley. Well done, CBS News. You have helped enable the defeat of Ukraine. That is the most likely outcome that's going to be happening now based upon these and many other comments. Zelensky said some other things over the weekend that just added some weight to this. But just for the moment, in the last few minutes we have here, just for the moment, put yourself in Russia's position. Forget about whether you like them or hate them. It's irrelevant. But if you were on their side and you had the military superiority, even better example, let's say that you are who you are. You're the United States. And we see that the Russians or Chinese, one or the other, had been trying to do some kind of a deal in Mexico on our southern border here. And they tried something that's not going to work. And so they tried to do something, but our military power was enough, and we started pushing them back. And then we have the decisive advantage, and we can either close the gap and close those jaws for the military victory, or we can have a negotiated settlement where they recognize that they can't do what they're doing anymore. They can't have the Russians or Chinese there. And they say, yeah, I don't want to. I don't care. I want you to do what I want. I want you to just give me what I want to my security and allow me to keep my military forces there, and then sure, we'll quit fighting. I mean, they would get laughed out of town. That wouldn't give nobody in America would give that any serious consideration. They would say, are you crazy? Have you lost your mind? What planet are you living on? Do you think that we're going to sign a deal from a position of military superiority with anybody on the Mexican side and a foreign adversary, and we're going to allow you to keep getting weapons and everything else, and then build up, and you may try again to seize part of the southern United States? It's beyond question what we would do. Then why do you think the Russians would be any different than we would be under the same circumstances? It's irrational to think that Russia would agree to that. Again, take the morality out of it, because let me be blunt here. The war doesn't give a damn about your morality or my morality or what anybody thinks is right or wrong or anything. It only cares about power. It only cares about the balance of power, who can and who can't do something, who can compel a certain outcome and who can't prevent a certain outcome. That's what it cares about. And that's how wars have always been for thousands of years. This one's no different. And that's where we are. And the more that we try to pretend that we can have PR messages and we can make people think certain things, and that'll somehow translate into the reality on the ground and how a settlement comes out, it's fantasy, folks. And it's self-defeating, self-harming fantasy as well. It is time, way beyond time, that we need to just acknowledge reality, get this war over with by the least offensive terms possible, and then get about to setting about trying to remove any potential threats for future conflict between the East and the West, between Russia and Europe, or Russia and the United States for that matter. That's what needs to predominate right now, because if we keep going down this path too far, we may find that whether by accident, a miscalculation, an error, any number of things could cause this thing to continue to spiral on. Every day the war continues on, the risk, however small, remains that something unexpected could happen that could cause this thing to flame up into areas beyond the Ukrainian borders. And that would serve no one's interest. not the Ukrainians, not the West, not the Russians. I know you don't care about the Russians, neither do I. I care about the Ukrainian people, I care about Europe, and I care about the United States. That's what we need to do if we want to prevent a bigger catastrophe than what we've already had. That, my friend, is the truth. Thank you very much for watching with us today. Like always, we're unintimidated and uncompromised to bring you the truth, whatever it is, because you deserve to know. Not like some of the stuff you're seeing on mainstream media. We're bringing you the whole truth, and then you can make your decisions accordingly. Thank you very much. We'll see you tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.